So today we welcome Josh Cardoz, Chief Creative and Learning Officer at Spun Group, a global leader in digital learning. He has an extensive background in digital learning strategy, execution, and team upskilling, and he's also host of the podcast Digital Learning Done Right. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Kevin. And thanks for reminding me that it's been a minute since I did any work for digital learning done right. But thanks for plugging it anyway, because there's still gold in there, even though I haven't really got to it in a while.
You got it. And, we'll include that in the show notes as well. So even if you just made it 30 seconds in, we've already got useful content for you here. So excited to have that for you. Yeah. So before we really get it started, I think you have something unique about you. Can you explain your title? You're not just a CLO, but you're also a creative officer. Can you talk a bit about what you do and also how you got to that point?
Yeah, it is a unique title, I guess, right? I don't think I know of one that exists elsewhere in the industry, per my knowledge. But I mean, it's quite exciting, and I think it's a reflection truly of what the role is and what it's about. On one side, sort of a traditional CLO; on the vendor side, which is being responsible for where we're going as an organization, what the market needs, what our customers need, and building the right set of offerings, value prop, business development, getting our strategy in place to make sure that we can serve the market and obviously grow the business as well too. And so a very business development side focused a bit, and I guess that would say is the business leader side of what I do. But the flip side of it too, which is what makes this quite niche, and also I guess where I meet the need, is at Sponge, we have such a strong brand in the marketplace for the creativity and the innovation that we bring to our solutions. And I've got my own sort of definition and beef with both of those terms that we can maybe get to a little bit later. But uh, when I prefer to use the term quality, I guess you could say, and we have a high bar for quality, and part of my role is to make sure that we're setting that high bar and we're meeting that high bar. And so the creative leader side of the role is making sure that the entire team, our consultants, our design team, our motion design team, our visual design team, the larger collaborative sales team as well too, we're all moving towards a direction of quality and creating the environments and systems that allow us to produce things at a high level. So that's sort of the I wouldn't say it's a juxtaposition, because it actually all kind of moves in one direction, but it's the sort of learning leader meets creative leader meets business leader. That's sort of the sweet spot, I guess, of my role.
I think something that the role entails nicely is a little bit of what's missing in a lot of learning and development positions is this emphasis on quality, but in the sense of learning products and not just learning as content or learning as filling knowledge, but learning as an actual product. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because when we start to think of learning as a product that's being shipped out to customers, there's a bit of a different urgency that comes with getting quality right or meeting your customers where they're at, as opposed to with an internal position. And I think that the two, it kind of comes together in your position, which is why I think it's very special and why it's unique. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to that point too, it is about sort of reframing what quality means for us and what quality means for how the story we want to tell our customers as well too. And so it's easy to equate quality in the context of something like bespoke content solutions with engagement, high engagement learning, when really that might be a subset of what quality might be, when really quality is about linking it to business outcomes. Quality might be about being as efficient as possible. And so it's a larger term, but it's all moving in the same direction of making sure that we've got that fine tune of quality, and we're not reducing it per se to aesthetics or engagement for the sake of engagement, because we feel like the need that we're trying to solve for is completion and likability versus business outcomes.
And again, it's that urgency that comes with where people actually spend their money. I think we also internally there is that urgency to provide a valuable service, but I think because of the way that a lot of learning and development is requested, that that piece of funding seems like it's buried in there, but it's actually just as important whether you have that external facing product or an internal product. And just to clarify, is your role, is it more customer facing, or is it more, and the external business, or is there an internal component as well?
Yeah, it's absolutely both. It's making sure that internally we've got our right strategy in place, but a huge part of my role is I lead our in-house consultancy, and so just making sure that we are servicing our customer needs, making sure our customers feel seen and heard, certainly at my level as well too, and just really guiding the team and enabling the team to do what they do best.
Very cool. And just for context, I know that, just looking at the different roles that you've had, yeah, I think it's very interesting. I've been getting a lot of questions from folks who are starting in an instructional design position or who are just
Yeah.
getting into learning experience design, and they're wondering what a career pathway looks like moving forward, and how do they maybe move up in roles, or how do they move horizontally. And your career progression is very cool. I'm wondering if you could talk about, you started out as an instructional designer, but now you're a CLO. Yeah, at a high level, what does that pathway look like, or what were some of the significant moments that you can identify that kind of led you to here?
I would say the explicit decision for a learning professional in their career is, on one side, it's the appetite to understand the business and make you a better designer, writer, whatever your wheelhouse is as a creator, and explicitly deciding whether you want to become a business leader simultaneously in doing it. And if I were to think about a sort of a CLO type role, certainly in-house, you're maybe a learning professional. To be quite honest with you, a lot of CLOs are not coming from learning, are not learning professionals, but it is a very business focused type of role. And I know that we have learning in the title of a CLO role, but it is an explicit decision in thinking about your career, whether that's you want to go down that path or not, because I've encountered some fantastically talented people and talking through sort of a career development path, and they said, oh, but I like the building and development of training. I love the building. I love the assembly of it. Some like the facilitation of it. But then there are those that are, yeah, but I'm trying to find the next level within my organization and create further impact. And you slowly start to build that sort of business acumen, that view for what we're really trying to do and what we're really trying to accomplish. And so I think part of it is a reflection in your own career journey of what you love to do, and I think that's super important in deciding what you want to do with your career. And the other part then is, if you've decided you want to go down a path of becoming more of an emergent learning leader and business leader, the business acumen part is the critical piece, I would say, that has been sort of a unifying narrative in kind of the whole points in my career specifically, going into the deep and dirty and dark places that necessarily L&D doesn't want to go, to come out and say, how are we linking this to the business? And on the vendor side, and my career is exclusively on the vendor side, how is our products and offerings actually solving real customer challenges versus the productization of content or whatever that may be? It's about making that jump, and being very quite intentional about it, I would say, is sort of a unifying piece between all those moments. But I, as someone who's in a very kind of business focused role now and team development role, I miss writing. I miss the creative side. I miss script writing. I miss all of those things. And so you start to get a sense of where you want to sit in the tactical versus the strategic, and where your sweet spot is. That would be probably my recommendation for those that are thinking about what their next step is in their career.
Yeah, I think to what you're saying, there's definitely a significant choice to be made. I think because like the inherent mindset of learning and instruction and education and people development, I think is a noble approach to designing any sort of product, where you're saying, I really would like to connect with this person. I'd really like to have them have the best experience and really develop as good as possible. But I think as we move into, as you said, as you move deeper into the profession, or you move deeper into the business, there is money attached to this at every step of the way, whether that's the cost of your work hours, whether that's the cost of your product and how well it sells, and being able to cater to what customers perceive is what they need versus what you think they need. And sometimes you have to make trade-offs with, is this the best decision for people, or is this the best decision for a product. And as you said, as you get deeper into your profession, or you get in more and more into the business, you have to be able to live in sort of those more of an area, a gray area of trade-offs versus very clear cut. This is my objective, and this is how I'm going to do my darndest to get there. So I definitely understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think piggyback what you said, 'cause I like the way that you framed that. It's a decision of whether you feel your sweet spot is completely representing the learner and defending the needs of the learner, or whether you feel like your sweet spot is navigating the needs of the business and bringing in the needs of the learner and finding the bridge between those two things. And then I would say, coming from the vendor side, that third dimension, then if we could kind of have like a Venn diagram of all that come together, is navigating the needs of our business. And what's the sweet spot between meeting organizational needs, learner needs, and obviously your own business needs as well too. Those sweet spots that you want to play in, there's a role for you in your career for what you want to do. And for those that are willing to take on the business leader role, it's exciting, it's tough work. I love it as someone who comes from a creator background and wanting to create the training and all that kind of stuff. I love it because it gives me the macro picture. And oftentimes we're stuck in our activity center in L&D with only the micro picture.
I'm so curious. You know, you're talking about this transition, and then I love this. I don't know if it's called a Venn triagram, if that such exists, where
A
it's
trigram, let's go with it. I love it.
trigram. Wonderful. So we have this trigram that exists, but I think it takes, you know, kind of stepping back and realizing that you need to make those decisions, or you need to acknowledge the business, and then you need to acknowledge the company and the product that you actually have in front of you. Moving from instructional designer into more business roles, was there a particular moment or particular project that you remember that made you realize that this is a business? I'm moving into more of a business role.
I think anytime you have the opportunity to access a certain level of stakeholder within an organization, it kind of opens up your world for, oh, that's what we're really trying to do. Like and I think, there's a bit of a bias depending on where you're sitting in the organization. It's like, my job is to create training and pump out training and hope that people do it. And then that's essentially done and dust. That's all I'm supposed to do. But when you get to a right level of conversation, whether it's sales enablement, customer education, whatever it may be, and you realize there are behaviors, metrics that are governing my little piece of the puzzle that goes towards what we're trying to impact, it becomes really exciting, and you can use like really simple stuff, because I know that sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating for those that feel like they need more of the business acumen. But take your favorite retailer of your favorite stuff. They are trying to sell more of it. And there's lots of different ways to impact selling more. Oh, well, we need better brand ambassadors on our retail floor, or we need to have more awareness around our product, and all of a sudden, and then you can see in there's lots of different places where the business comes together to try and solve for that. And one of them is sort of learning interventions. And then it becomes really exciting to think about, if we do our job really well, and this for me is where learning really becomes a hypothesis. If we do this, then the payout for that is actually really exciting in terms of, and it's not about learning. The learning is always the medium for me. It's the means to an end. And if we really want to think and talk about the end, and this is where to your question about having access to the right stakeholder room who thinks and talks that way, it really inspires you as a learning creator to say, let's put that front and center of the experience, because that's the story. That's the narrative. It's not about the knowledge gaps. It's not about filling gaps of learning. It's about helping people do things differently or better, changing attitudes, changing behavior in service of that business outcome. And that's the exciting part. And so that, and I always kind of leached onto that early in my career of, yes, I'm a learning practitioner. Yes, I have a background in teaching and education. But the part that excites me is just helping solve real problems and seeing the eventual outcome of them as well too.
I think to your point, as what that reminded me of is was thinking of, in particular, shifting from even just building learning products into more even corporate reskilling. I remember a significant person. There was a senior stakeholder who actually did not care about training, and I remember sitting on
Which
this
is quite
call with
common.
him, which is quite common. And in for some odd reason, marketing folks in particular, no shade to them. I work on a marketing team now, but it's like, why are we should be doing something versus why are we taking time away from desk to do this training? And from that person's perspective, they were looking for, you know, the path of least resistance, or they towards this particular, they wanted their employees to do something emphasis on the doing. They didn't care how they got there. They didn't care how, what the learning pathway was. They just wanted to see a different result that matched progress towards their OKRs. And so I remember that being the first time where I was like, okay, I'm bringing the learning and the training expertise, but I'm here to convince somebody that that this input is going to lead to moving the needle in some way. And so for me, I find it ironic that it was the person who really didn't care about learning at all that taught me, oh, this is a business and we have things to accomplish, and there is urgency and a timeline in order to do this.
Yeah, and it's all entirely fair criticism, I would say. Let's not waste people time. The goal of your job is to do the work, not to learn about doing the work, And so I completely see the need to justify, is this worth people's time? And I think
Mm,
that's a question we may not always ask too much in L&D, because I think in my mind, we always have this presumption of the self-directed, ultra-motivated learner, and when in reality it's, I usually don't have time for this, and most of us take the training when we've got that third or fourth email from our manager or LMS or compliance officer saying, hey, you've been on a magic list of people who, and it's like it's tapping into the more of the shaming motivation than it is about the amazing self-motivated individual who wants to do best for their careers. And we all want to do best in our jobs and our careers, but it's about creating the time and energy to do it. And so I like the provocation of saying, okay, well, what if we did nothing?
mm,
What if we did nothing? Let's we have a bias towards action. Let's quantify that action. Are people doing things? Cool. Are they doing it well? Are they doing it to a degree that is yielding an output that the business is expecting? There's probably an answer in there that's something along the lines of, this probably can be optimized. Cool. That's our entry point for
mm-hmm.
L&D. Is it a behavior gap? Is it a knowledge gap? Is it a skills gap? Something is there to help unlock additional, everyone's favorite word these days, productivity, and getting towards what we're trying to do, rather than presuming, well, it needs to start with training because we feel that everyone needs to have training.
Mm, interesting. When you're going through this idea of um, getting buy-in for your hypothesis and framing it from the opposite end of, hey, this is my input, this is what I expect to get. We'll run this test and we'll run this learning experiment and see what happens on the outset. But then you're framing it in terms of to get buy-in of what is the cost of doing nothing. Is there do you have any examples of where this might have gone well or poorly? Where you were, well, let's focus on success. So where this has gone well, sorry about that. Where this has gone well for you in terms of showing the value of a hypothesis or being able to explain it in terms that a business leader would understand. Maybe even thinking about somebody who doesn't prioritize training and learning.
I was going to say I have lots of stories where it hasn't gone well, but it hasn't stopped me in order to do it. I think, to be honest with you, I think it starts with, who are you speaking to?
Hmm.
Because I think if you're speaking to, and pardon my very broad generalizations here, but I think if you're speaking to a learning leader, it's easy to convince them of learning value, and maybe their bias is towards training output
Hmm.
and not necessarily towards solving business challenges. Now,
Hmm.
not to say that it isn't between those things, or that you can find a solution, but it's about getting them from the journey from learning to the business. Whereas maybe if you're speaking to a business leader, to your example of someone who didn't care for learning, it's about walking them back from a business challenge to potentially identifying a training need.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be really clear, and this is where this is having a broader sense of a business and what a business is trying to do. Everything tied to strategy in a business is just about a series of calculated bets.
Mm-hmm.
There's no X equals Y in business terms. Otherwise, everyone would be making billions of dollars by doing the exact same thing over and over again. So depending on where you are in a business and where you sit, everyone's taking turns making calculated bets on, we believe this is going to outcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a hypothesis, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
calculated bet. And the same thing applies to what we're trying to do on the learning side of things. We believe that learning is a piece of a puzzle to solve a business outcome. Because in a workplace context, it's never just learning alone that
Mm-hmm.
solves selling more, keeping your people, making people proud of where they work. It's a lot more complex than that. So if we believe that it is part of a puzzle, what is that part that's going to be put in a position to succeed to meet those needs? And that is the calculating part, where depending on where you're talking to a learning leader, you're saying, okay, well, let's spend some time focusing just on the business. Can we talk about the metrics there? Can we, and the way that I always frame it is, you want to arrive on a compelling question. And the compelling question frames the engagement, the problem you're trying to solve. And you've hit the compelling question if the words training and learning do not exist in there. It's tapped 100% into business priorities. So I'll give you an example. So the introspective compelling question is, how do we create the best possible sustainability program across our organization? Valid question, but you're not hitting the compelling part of why it matters to the business. And so the reframing of that would be something like, how do we make sure that our sustainability strategy that is globally announced, it's in our shareholder program and everything, how do we make sure our sustainability strategy is not only actionable, but scaled globally and in a consistent way? That is something that your CEO can 100% sign off without thinking about, versus saying, we need to build a sustainability academy, versus saying we need to create a series of interventions. And they're both answering the same question. But when you frame it in the context of the business, what I consider to be the compelling question, the criteria of it is that it compels you to a certain momentum, that if you don't answer that question, there's going to be quite the cost of doing nothing. There's going to be quite a lot that's going to be left on the table by doing nothing, versus saying that, oh, well, if we create a training program, something will happen, versus saying there's an urgency behind not doing this at a scale which can be quantified, not doing this in an actionable way which can be quantified, and also tying back to that compelling business initiative. Every single organization is all about ESG these days, and how they action their strategy. It's one thing to define your great sustainability strategy. How you action it, and the role of something like learning and being able to do that, is the difference between whether organizations succeed or don't succeed in being able to do it.
Interesting. So for if I'm putting it all together, for a compelling question, kind of the learning team has to be a part of crafting that compelling question.
Yep.
And understanding that there will, as you said, there will be other inputs in order to finding a solution to that compelling question. But Alan, learning folks have to figure out what is the learning and training part of this compelling question that everyone that learning has. What is the actual learning and training part of solution of this overall compelling question? But that compelling question is what defines the different inputs to get there. I think that's very interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, the compelling question is, it needs to be grounded in a real business priority. And that's easy. That can be easily found in your organization. You just need to look up any sort of shareholder report that's been put out, publicly accessible. Your CEO's priorities are always available. It's pretty easy to find. So it needs to be grounded in real business priority. It needs to have a sense of urgency behind the question.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't answer that question, you know that something wouldn't be going right. So it's capturing an opportunity, or it's about reframing a particular challenge and answering it in a business context. And
Hmm.
then I would say the other part of it that's really important, and this is really about how we just sell L&D to the business,
Hmm.
it should not include training and learning. And I know that's counterintuitive, but it also helps us as learning professionals understand what's really going on and what's really at stake. And I
Hmm.
think it also helps invite more collaboration across the business. You know, you don't need to answer that question alone. Maybe you're partnering with sales on that. Maybe there's a technology partnership in there that needs to happen as well there too. But you're just you're being a catalyst to answering that question. And yes, the answer can include a learning intervention, obviously, if that's what the nature of your role is. But it shouldn't be ingrained in the question, because if the question includes training and learning, then you're already teasing the solution. When the compelling question
Mm.
just needs to be focused on the challenge.
I think to your point as well, it's part of the reason learning and development, the L&D industry is in the position it's in, is because there is a legacy of misuse of learning and training, or a misconception about what learning and training means. And everybody has gone through that, whether that's, in the classroom or on the job. And there's so many different uh, ideas of how that might look, and that might be positive or negative depending on the stakeholders you're speaking to. So I think that's extremely critical, what you're saying about that compelling question. Don't mention learning and training, because that shows that you're focused on the business and you're not teasing a solution, but rather making space for it to be an input, which I think is a nice framing of it. I'm curious because you mentioned partnership with other departments, and one of those departments is tools and tech. And I want to shift the conversation here, because I think the underlying strategies of how business problems are tackled, I think they're being reframed in a new light for L&D, but they've always been around. These are um, yeah, as far as business strategy, not much has changed. But what's really changing is the tools and the tech that are involved in delivering these outcomes, or allowing us to do new things. And I'm wondering, in thinking about in your new role as chief creative and learning officer at Sponge, it's like, what are the role that digital tools play in all of this? And thinking about, if I put myself in your shoes for it, and think with what decisions you're trying to make at the moment, even just how technology affects delivery and the communication that you have with your customers. I'm wondering, what is the role of digital tools for you in learning and development?
I would say it falls into three buckets. Uh, the first one being experience, and we talked off the top about quality. And I have an obsession with quality of experience. And so whatever we can use in terms of digital tools to deliver a certain quality of experience is something that I'm totally on board with. Knowing that we kind of live in an industry where sometimes there's a debate over what quality actually does look like, and maybe speed to content is more important than quality of
Mm.
content, per se. But how we use technology to help us deliver a better learning experience at scale, which is really what the digital catalyst for me is a key part of how we would use that. Because when I think about what the advantages of digital learning is versus face-to-face learning or any other sort of medium, is that component of scale. I mean, we're working with organizations here of 10, 20, 30,000 people, as an employee base, and you can have compelling experiences, but if they can't be scaled, it's not
Mm.
meeting the needs of the business. And
Hmm.
so for the good chunk of where people sit in a business, they look at digital learning in a kind of reductive way as, well, this is just how we scale things. I think the learning leader, for example, within an organization would understand, oh, well, digital learning is a medium for a lot of things. We can use it as a data tool, as uh, a storytelling tool. We can use it, in a lot of different ways to create more interaction, to make sure it's more self-directed, more equitable, more inclusive. There's a lot of these things, but I think for a certain portion within the business, to your example of the business leader who doesn't necessarily care about learning per se, and not in a bad way, digital can be seen as a blunt instrument of, well, it needs to be on an LMS and this super friendly thing so that we can scale it to our entire population. Because the goal of this training program is to make sure that everyone can take it, regardless of the
Mm,
quality of the experience. Which from my standpoint, I think my maturity with that sort of statement is I've actually grown to love the statement, because it speaks to what the real business need is and how the business could view something as learning and development. Is your job is not only to upskill, fill knowledge gaps, and do it in a compelling way, but to also
mhm.
do it in a scalable way. And so, what I always coach the team with is whatever we're deciding to do, understand where the solution sits in the organization. And if you're training a team of 500 people and you're doing a blended solution or something like that, what is the value of scaling that to the rest of the business or not?
Mm,
And
mhm,
and how we go about, because that's the real business reality
mhm.
of what we're trying to do. So that's what I mean when I say that it's digital can sometimes be a blunt instrument for just scalability.
I'm curious how, how did we get to there? Why, where does where, in your opinion, where does that philosophy come from? I mean, because you were also talking about, digital being, it is reductive in what we think digital learning should be. There are reasons that people think, oh, digital learning equals an LMS when it can be so much more.
I definitely think it is just the legacy thinking around the birth of e-learning, a
Mm,
term I never say, by the way. But it's the birth of that coming out of just the dawn of technology and the role of digitization of content.
yes.
And L&D's come a very long way from a few decades ago, where we would have uh, giant binders and CD-ROMs of training, and we
Laser
needed to find a
discs.
yeah, and to make it as there's a good portion of this audience who'll have no idea what a laser disc
Yeah.
is. Um, and it's e-learning was supposed to be a promise of scalability.
Mhm.
It was supposed to be a promise of we can convert, and there was a giant conversion activity in sort of the early days of digital learning, e-learning, is that, hey, organization, you've got a bunch of stuff. You've got large binders of things where you used to do it face to face. Guess what? You don't need to do face to face anymore. E-learning is here to solve all your problems, and hence why you can see so much legacy e-learning looks like PowerPoint, because the original format was PowerPoint slide presentations. And so the
Mhm.
cadence got established early on for what the expectation of digital learning is. And only now in recent years, and obviously with the evolution of a new workforce who are digital natives and who are coming through and understanding what a digital experience can be versus what we think e-learning can be, is the conversation shifting. But I do think it is born out of a legacy attitude of e-learning was a quick fix turnkey solution to convert face-to-face materials into scalable technology learning. And I think that's
Yeah,
where it kind of was born.
and I would add on to that that it's not just any face-to-face learning. It is lecture style, classroom,
Yeah.
expert class of students. That experience does not. I think it is scalable, in a very roughshod way, but the experience does not scale. I think the tech scales, and you're able to move from one medium to another, but whether the information has been redesigned for a new digital format, I think is always interesting for me, especially when we talk about, is this an engaging experience? Probably
Yeah,
not.
and glad you plugged the podcast off the top, because there's actually a great episode I can point everyone to called The Digital Advantage, where I kind of talk
Mm,
about this narrative of how we undersell the value of what we think digital learning can offer, when really you can see it as a blank canvas for a lot of possibility.
yep.
And an example that I always use is like the best, not necessarily as a great example of an industry, but a great example of digital experience is what journalism does in terms of digital storytelling. Look at what the New York Times does. Look at what the BBC does with their online presence. And when they do long form articles, investigative journalism. And why I love that as an example is because they all come out of roots of the traditional paper. and how you use this as an opportunity to reimagine the experience, to bring the learner in, to absorb them, visualization of key stats, all those types of things. It's a great example of me of what I call the digital advantage, where it's like, no, there's a canvas here for empathy.
Mm,
There's a canvas here for storytelling. There's a canvas here for being more data driven, for example, something you don't necessarily get coming out of the classroom. You build the right learning experience in the right way. I mentioned off the top about how learning is a hypothesis. You need evidence to support that hypothesis. And so for me, the evidence that can come out of building the right data-driven learning journey can really
mhm.
support the hypothesis that you believe that you're building towards. And so this component for me of the digital advantage is something I feel like we're not talking enough about, because the legacy default thinking is that, well, primarily digital learning is mostly used for scale and completion and a checkbox activity, when really, and this is partially also to, it's almost chicken and egg because of the technology we use.
Yep.
And I think you're well placed to talk about sort of new emergent technologies that can help us break barriers of experience, to say, yes, we can do it for scale. Yes, we can do it for completion, but there's a canvas here that we can use for digital to really push the boundaries of experience.
Yeah, you know, to your point, I think this is a perfect segue into what I, want to end with. I feel like, which is AI. I think when you talk about scale, you can't help but talk about scale in the age of, or even just in 2024, without talking about AI. And I think where I'm hopefully flipping the script is where most podcasts might be starting off with AI. I'm hoping to end with talking about AI. But to your point, it's when there's a new piece of tech, what does it allow you to do differently? And just to borrow from your example before jumping into AI, I was thinking about the Daily, the podcast of the Times, where it's
Yeah.
reimagining how you tell a story and what does a deep dive in 15 minutes look like versus reading the whole newspaper and trying to give a summary and telling a story in just a 15-minute audio format. That was something that really changed how I interact with the news, where maybe the paper was something that I kind of had to do, sort of like having to learn trigonometry, which I don't use at all today. You just have to learn it, is what I was told. But then the podcast comes out, and it's how I can then interact with the news in a meaningful way, or some way that's useful to me. But final question here. You talk about scaling, you talk about digitization of e-learning and different experiences. I'm curious how you're looking at AI and L&D. What is, there's the risk that you had mentioned of us continuing to do extend the legacy of what we've been doing before, which is just lecture style e-learning, just created faster, that nobody wants. I think that's a pretty obvious obstacle to avoid. But curious how you're looking at it as a in your role now.
Yeah. First of all, love the Daily. A great example of a great example of a compelling question, by the way. It's easy to say, how do we do engaging, long form journalistic storytelling? But what
Mm,
I see in that question is, how do we bring current events to a new generation who has no time or medium to watch the news, you know? And so that's what's happening in macro there. I find very exciting, but a conversation for a different time. Um,
I'm going to give you a Michael Barbaro. Yeah.
that was excellent. That was excellent. Um,
Thank you.
I, my take and my evolving take on AI is really beyond L&D. And what I've been really observing is, ever since ChatGPT blew up and kind of accelerated our buzz and conversation around this, I've been paying really close attention to the output of what that gives and how we react to it on a human level. Because at the end of the day, technology and our relationship technology is going to fundamentally change. But what's not going to change is our hard-coded lizard brain DNA of being human. And so when I think of the output, certainly in terms of content and AI, when I think about all the new kind of tools that we have available to us, I keep coming back to quality of experience and the human experience. And I know that sounds kind of hokey and philosophical, but I truly believe that the logical conclusion of generative AI is that everyone will be able to generate everything, and then all of a sudden everything becomes nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And our job, one of our jobs as L&D professionals, is to find a way to reach above the noise to that person that says people don't have time for training, they need to focus on work. We need to convince people this is worth their time and their energy. And I am all for AI solutions that support that. And I'm all against those that just perpetuate the endless goop of more stuff that we're going to put in front of people. And so quality of experience for me, I don't see it as an exclusively human endeavor, but I definitely see it as a human-led endeavor. But where AI becomes interesting for me is how we can make that a tech-enabled human endeavor.
Oh, that's a. I have nothing to say. That's so quotable. I think that should be written on your headstone. Just thinking, 100 years into the future, it will read, Josh. He prioritized the quality of the human experience and connection. I really like that one. Sorry,
Well,
but yeah,
most like if you ever watched Futurama, then you know that I won't have a tombstone in the future. I'll just
just
have a
have a
floating
head.
head,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
sitting above my tombstone. But yeah.
Not a bad way to go either. But Josh, I can't thank you enough for your time and sharing your insights. If folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn. Come find me on LinkedIn. I tend to have interesting views, and you may agree with them or not. But worst case, you can always DM me to shout at me, and of course through Sponge as well too. Some really exciting things happening at Sponge, and that's not just by coincidence of my arrival, but I truly believe in the quality of learning experience that we're trying to achieve. And if that's your kind of thing, then let's have a chat. So.
Sounds good. And we'll put a link to that also in the show notes. But otherwise, Josh, I can't thank you enough for your time and stopping by. It's been a
Yeah, it's my
pleasure.
pleasure. It's been a pleasure to chat as always with you. Nice to have a formal chat, and looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Sounds good. We'll see you down the road.
Thank you.